Welcome to OpenLegacy. In this video, we will create a Java-based RESTful API from a CompuWare Topaz workbench environment. A prerequisite is to have the Topaz workbench with the OpenLegacy plugin installed. In our scenario, the Topaz workbench is already connected with the mainframe. The workbench contains the COBOL code generated with the Topaz IDE. Using the OpenLegacy plugin, we will create an SDK and then a functional API with a contract that will be used in Swagger mode. The process comprises 5 simple stages. The first stage, fetch the COBOL code. You see that we are using version 20.1.1 of the Topaz workbench with the OpenLegacy plugin already installed. Create a new mainframe project. Create a new connection. Log into the mainframe, right-click on the project. After the connection has been made, we can see the mainframe contents. We fetch a program from within the mainframe. We will use the FinInQ2 program in this video. As you know, you can develop over the COBOL code using the workbench. But in this video, we will move to the OpenLegacy perspective where we will build the API. The second stage, build an SDK. We run the OpenLegacy Create SDK wizard. We name the project, define a mainframe CICS backend, and the connection details. We connect to the mainframe using the OpenLegacy connector. As you can see, we now have 2 connectors to the mainframe, one from CompuWare and one from OpenLegacy. Click Finish to create the structure of the SDK, a full Java project, named Topaz SDK. We now create a new file for the code from the copybook, copy the COBOL code from the Topaz workbench, and paste it in the OpenLegacy IDE. We then generate the Java model from the COBOL source in the OpenLegacy IDE. When the model has been created, we can see that the COBOL linkage section structure is replicated in the Java code, and the Java class shows the structure and the converted definitions. The third stage, generate the API. In the OpenLegacy IDE, we launch the Create API wizard. Name the API, define the SDK we just created as the project reference to create the API structure. The fourth stage, generate the contract. Right-clicking on the API name, we generate the API from the SDK. We can define the inputs and outputs by individual fields, or even define the entire COM area as the output. When the API has been generated, the contract has been created. The last stage is to launch the API and test it as a Swagger specification. Right-click on the API and run the application. When the application is running, it takes over local port 8080, so we open a browser to that localhost and open a Swagger page with our API. We must first authorize. By default, we use OAuth 2 as our security framework. We then select and try out our API. We enter test data, a customer ID, and we see the results returned from the mainframe. We gain another important feature with the CompuWare OpenLegacy combination, which is the ability to debug the execution code of the Java and COBOL code. We return to the Topaz workbench and open the expediter. We then select Debug Configurations and select the project, in our scenario, OL Demo. We click the Visualization view and then click Debug. This dynamically runs the code and stops at the breakpoint. We move to the OpenLegacy environment and run our SDK as a JUnit test to call the FinInQ2 code on the mainframe. The two environments run concurrently, and when the breakpoint is reached, we can perform the debugging directly in the code, as well as a view of the environment where we see the OpenLegacy broker code is connecting to the FinInQ2 code on the mainframe.